7:32, I'm calling the meeting to order. You'll be disappointed to notice that Jack is not here right now. He will join us later. We're also a little shy tonight of the full FNB. We're very proud of the fact that we always show up in full force, including the two of the schools when we had a quorum, which we don't have right now. The most important subject on the agenda tonight is the budget, but we're gonna see if we can postpone that item until Jack joins us in a few minutes. And perhaps I can call on Kip to tell us about what's going on with the Oxbridge School.
For point of order, you need a motion to amend the agenda.
Thank you. Okay, already I'm in trouble. I would like to entertain a motion to change the agenda.
Motion.
Second, thank you. And I would like to move the item number 7 up and talk about the Oxford School and hope that Kip can give us a little update. Yes, please.
Okay. Oh, thank you. So, as I understand it, before you, Bert, you have the $3 million possible resolution appropriation.
Yes.
So, do you want me to speak about that first, or about the process where we are?
If you just talk about the, assume that most people really don't know where we are, where we started, where we're going. Give us a little background.
Okay. In September, the Board of Education delivered to the Board of Selectmen a request to consider building a school. They provided educational specifications as required. They also provided an updated enrollment projection, which I think went out, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Which is 10 years, thank you. The concept that they wanted to promote was rebuilding the Oxbridge School, which was built in 1965 and added on to in 1996, I believe. They wanted the concept of combining all of the early learning programs from Oxbridge, Tokenie, and I believe it was Royal School at one location to free up, if you will, temporary facilities and other facilities at those other schools. In October, the Board of Selectmen developed a charge for the building committee and adopted that charge. And in early January, the final committee was chosen by virtue of our interview process, and we started in February 4th. Our first order of business, besides getting acquainted, was we have a committee of 7 people and 1 alternate. On that committee are people who have architectural experience, a person who was in charge of building the middle school. We have finance expertise with John Zabrodsky, Chairman of the Board of Finance. We have a neighbor, Mike Altieri. We also have a member of the PTA at the school itself. And we have a very interesting gentleman who, Randy Giraldo, who comes from a real estate investment background. And I would say that so far the committee has worked very well together. Our first order of business after getting our feet on the ground and understanding what our commission was to start the process of finding and hiring an architect. We started that process, and we hope I pull up a piece of paper here which will tell me the exact time frames, but we started back in early March. We received over 11 different, if you will, interests from architects from our request for proposal. We cut it down to 6. We interviewed all 6. We're down to 3 now, and we're going to have a judgment for the finalist by May 14th, excuse me. We've given each of the 3 finalists what's called a charrette in the architectural term. It's a problem to solve. Everyone's doing the same problem, which is basically trying to figure out the best siting of a new school on that particular site. Well, it's 10 plus acres. It's a difficult site to figure out exactly how to site a new school. Along the way, the architectural fees that we saw, I have it here in front of me, varied from about $1.8 million to $2.6 million. And the reason for our request for a $3 million appropriation is to cover potential architect fee, various other studies that we're doing, traffic study, we're doing a hazardous material study, we're doing a testing sample, a water sample testing, and we're also doing bore samples of the various fields, all of those kinds of things that have to be paid for. And finally, we're hiring for a very small amount of money, $5,000 more or less, someone to assist us with the state grant process. The $3 million is attempting to cover the cost of the architect, these various studies that have to be done, they're mandated, and also some money for the construction manager when we hire him to help defray his costs initially for doing work with the architect, because we want the architect and the construction manager to be working together early on. One of the issues that we're facing, and it's a very complex issue, is the issue of state reimbursement. Right now, the state will provide certain amounts of money for school constructions, provided that we meet their deadline of submitting certain documents by June 30th. Those documents are much less finalized as compared to our garage project, where we came in with construction drawings, bids, and everything was laid out in front of us. So when we presented the RTM, we had a real number. We had a guaranteed maximum price contract. We had done lots of testing and bore samples and everything else, so we knew what we were getting into. And we had a certain level of contingencies. And the result of that was we came in 1 month early and 9% under budget. And we did not have a padded budget. Because of what the state does, their regulations in order to get money, it's a totally different process. The process is that you go to the state, you get 2 cuts of the apple, one every year. You get one cut a year. June 30th, you have to submit your estimate and plans for a school. What that includes, it includes the educational specifications, it includes the enrollment, and both of those, enrollment projections, both of those we have, and they're in good shape thanks to the Board of Education. Number 3, we have to have a conceptual design. The conceptual design is the first design in architects in the process of coming down to construction drawings where we actually get bids. You start with a conceptual design, you then go to schematics, you then go to design development, and finally you have construction drawings. And from those detailed construction drawings, you actually get your bidding process done. And then you know what you have for a guaranteed maximum price contract. Well, our architect won't be hired until May 27th. As a result, the best we can do is have a conceptual design, and that's all the state wants. The state wants a conceptual design, but they want something else. And this is the real conundrum. They want authority from the RTM, appropriation, for the project. Well, I'm looking at Martha, as Martha well knows from our last project. To make an estimate of what your project's going to cost for a conceptual design is crazy, but that's what the state wants. Now, we could say, forget the state. We're going to do it the right way. Go all the way through construction drawings, get bids, come to the RTM. Here's our numbers. We'll miss the window. Does that matter? Well, the amount of money that the state's talking about is 10.7% of our approved numbers. That's approved. It's not what we're going to bill for. If you use 90,000 square feet as a rough number, cost down here to build is about $465 per square foot. The state says, I'm sorry, our averages are $365. So the most you're going to get, we're going to consider is a $33 million building. I don't care what you spend. Okay. We might give you, and for that we're going to give you, because you're Darien, like Greenwich, the maximum amount you get back is 10.7% of that approved amount. They also said, we'll consider 5% more for you because you're doing early learning. Well, these are not insignificant dollars, and therefore we feel we have to make an effort to meet that deadline. Thereby we're hiring a consultant to help us get that job done. And we'll have an architect hired and tell them, okay, conceptual design, please, no later than June 3rd, and cost estimate. Okay. But we're going to come back to the RTM with really a swag. It may be this. We hope it's not going to be more than that. We don't know. And I want everybody to know that in advance, because that's not the way we want to do business. We want to do business where we have a completely done construction drawings, bid out, guaranteed maximum price, then we know what the real cost is. We won't know. But if we want to get state money, and we want to meet the June 30th deadline, we've got to come up with this, I'll call it, a rather rough estimate.
Everyone wants the state money.
Well, the state money comes with lots of tags.
But if you rush the job and it costs us more money to rush the job than the state money, then what's the point, right?
Well, we're not going to rush the job. The job itself won't be rushed, but the state application is going to be sort of a guess. Now, what if we don't meet that deadline? Then we have to wait one full year for next June 30th. What happens between now, this June 30th, and next June 30th? Well, you've heard about the debt diet by Governor Watt. There may be less money available from bonding for school construction. Number two, 10.7% is what we are expected to get on our approved construction costs now for this item. Next year, according to what the legislation's out there, it'll be down to 5%. So the point is, there's a real advantage if we can get into the queue now. And most interestingly of all, Duke and Rusty went up and visited with the Office of State of School Construction Grant and Review. Wow. And the guy, literally, the director, was encouraging us. I mean, I don't understand this. Was encouraging us to apply now. He said, we've got the money. You guys are farther along than most schools are at this stage. And we said, okay, we'll take a look at that. But the downside is coming to you as the RTM with a number that's going to be basically a guess. And we're going to want to guess high so we don't end up with a number that's ridiculous and have to value engineer down, which is stupid.
If I might, I fully agree with that approach. Kate and I had a conversation. I have one question and then I have a comment. My one question is, at some time, once you are done, where you will get back to similar to your estimates, similar to the Public Works garage?
Absolutely.
You will come back to the RTM to just do a presentation of where you're at?
Yeah, because that's the real number.
Okay.
I mean, what we're going to do, Jack, if we make an application by June 30th, and that will tell us if we are how much we'll get by, I think it's either late November or early December, is it?
December 15th.
December 15th. But in between, we're going to go from that conceptual design to schematics, design and development, and we're going to go all the way to developing construction drawings. We cannot, I should add this, until the state says what you have or don't have, you cannot go out and get anything bid. So we're going to be all prepared to do that. The good news is, right now, according to what we're hearing, is there's not a lot of work going on in school construction in the state. It's a good time to be in the queue. We're hoping that'll be the case by the time we get there. If we get told we don't have any money for you, well then we haven't. All we've done is, okay, we didn't get the money. We haven't lost any time in the process. We want to build the school as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Okay, that's our job, as we see it.
Now, I will say, so here's my comment. One of the good things is that I know John's on your committee,
Yes.
so we will not be value engineering. And I trust that the final number will be a good number because John's on your committee. So, I mean, I think that's where we have to go, plus the rest of the team is a good team.
The whole team is
It's
exceptional. I have no
really a
concerns.
good
We're not going to, and I'm saying.
I'm joking about John.
No, I'm
coming
saying
in
so going
tonight.
back to John, because I can tell you that John says, I will not be on a committee that in 3 to 5 years, we're talking about rebuilding or extending the same school. And the answer is, you got it.
And I'm very happy that that is a statement. I think many of the rest of us need to speak for the
We're
committee.
not gonna,
but we're tired of doing that.
it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and it's a fool's game. Now, there is good value engineering, real value engineering, where you can find better processes for the same cost, or you can find the same processes for a lower cost. But when you start cutting out processes and features, which is what the typical value engineering is, just to cut costs, we're not doing it. We're not going to be caught in that game.
I mean, worst comes to worst, I'm assuming if something unknown happens, like what happened when we built the high school and we discovered that there was asbestos in the auditorium flooring, I'm expecting that if that happens, that they will go back to the RTM and the appropriate bodies to just get the appropriate funds.
Exactly, but more importantly, and to your point originally, is we're doing that testing now,
Yeah,
all of
yeah.
that testing. I think the garage was a great example. The garage, they did testing. And what they could not test? They could not test the inside of the structures of the pillars that held up the floor. And that was the only place where we had a cost overrun to speak of. Am I right, Martha? I think that's right. But you couldn't tell. You couldn't even put an X-ray through there to see how much corrosion had occurred through the salt. But you have a contingency, and that's what your contingencies are for.
Right.
Yes.
If you are receiving state money, are there rules about which vendors you can use and suppliers and all that that might affect cost?
As we speak, Rusty is reviewing the complex rules about construction manager bidding process. We are no longer bound by the lowest cost price. There is a lot of leeway to choose the best value out there. Combination of quality services and everything, and reputation and everything else. However, there are certain straitjackets that you have to follow into. Yes. As a matter of fact, even applying for state funds, you should think in your head that you apply for the funds in June. Let's say end of June. Let's say you get the grant. The process of getting all the grant funds approved probably will cost $250,000 in just paperwork and follow-through over the 3-year project. Just that's the way it is. Greenwich didn't get their final payment of their funds until 5 years after the high school was finished. That's insane. If you have your project in line, you should be able to get it reasonably soon. But I'm saying there's a cost to doing it, and we're talking about saving the administrative people here by hiring somebody to help us do that.
I think that if we
I
might,
think would appreciate that.
I also just want to mention, and then Martha, when we did our school walkthrough, and Paul was there, and having been a CFO at Ridgefield and that, we talked about the fact that these grants have become so complicated that one needs to actually hire someone from the outside to in fact effectuate this. And that was mentioned during the walkthrough of the schools, and I saw that that's part of this here. So that is consistent with what Paul's experience has been, as well as our own district. So I just wanted to mention that it's not just here, it's district-wide because of the complication, how complicated these are.
And the rules keep changing with every legislative session. So it's worthwhile having somebody who does this on a regular basis.
Yeah, Martha?
I'm just unclear on the 10.7%. Is that when you apply in June? I don't know, when you hear, do you hear that you will get the full amount, but you get it in increments as you complete work, or how does that, or could you only get 5%?
Well, they could, the thing about it is that right now we fall within the tier, the bottom tier, which apparently is 10.7%. This is what the director of that office told Duke and Rusty when they went to visit him. He also said, okay, look, you have approximately a 90,000 square foot building, roughly. If you use our building price cost down here, it's $465 a square foot. That's roughly $40 million. Then you have your site work, your bonding costs, and everything else. He said the most you're going to get from us is a building based on $33 million because we use $365 as a statewide average. So that's the first cut. But he said, I'll add back maybe 5%, maybe I'll give you 5% for your early learning. Now, when you get the funds itself, you as you build and you submit your payment applications from the contractor, you have to submit all this paperwork to the state and they reimburse you. If you have it all in line, if you've gotten your stuff in order, hopefully the delay in reimbursement is not long. If it's not kept in good order, you can have a mess.
So it sounds like, though, the way it exists now, you would get the 10.5% if you get
If we get
money,
something, yes.
plus a little extra kicker for the early
Well,
learning, possibly.
5% is not a small amount.
Well, right.
And they'd also grant us, Rusty told me, and Duke confirmed this, on the, is it the site planning and other soft costs up to $2 million, they give us maybe another 10.7%. So it's real money, right? I mean, we thought originally, well, this is nuts because we saw the legislation coming us back to 5%, the debt died. Why do that? We'll be waiting around for a year doing nothing. The answer is we're not.
And then the other thought I had is, in terms of going to the RTM for money, is there anything precluding us if they say they only reimburse basis up to 365, go for whatever, the 33 million, and then as you develop your costs better, you can go back to the RTM and say, we refined it, and we actually think it'll cost 42 million. You know, you'll have to give us another.
No, we'll definitely.
We can't do that.
We'll have to come back to you, but we can't go back to the state. I think the state gives us one crack at the.
No, but you would say, but they base all their money on the 365 per square foot.
They base it on what they look at the specifications.
Right.
They decide which of the specifications, they're talking about areas and like, well, let's say, for example, the hallways are too wide for their specifications. They're going to say, no, if you got a 12-foot wide hallway, we're going to give you based on a 10-foot wide hallway. But then after all of that, you get down to then we're going to base it on a cost of 365, which is our statewide cost rather than your cost. I mean, it's.
It's very,
If the state only does it on 365 a foot, is there any reason to come to the RTM for your swag for what you think the actual real cost is going to be, or do you just come to the RTM for the max that you think the state would allow?
No, we're going to come back to. We're going to come to you for the maximum we think possibly would ever spend on the project,
Okay.
and hopefully we'll come back to you with the real numbers that will be lower.
And how does the swag get developed between now and June, and who sort of is involved in that process?
The architect develops a conceptual design after they are chosen, which will be May 27th, I believe I have on here. May 14th, we have the final contest between the three, and then May 27th, the contract is finalized. So after May 27th, they're off and running, building a conceptual design. They have a cost estimator when the design is done. We have a cost estimator that checks it, come up with a cost, our cost down here, not the state's cost. And we'll come to you with that number and with something added as a cushion. I mean, understanding that it's not the number we expect to build against, but we don't want to come back and say, oh, we said it was going to be 25, now it's going to be 40. That's the last thing we want to do.
So,
And have you identified the person that you want to use for the grant help? And where are you sort of in that process?
Duke and Rusty are meeting with them tomorrow.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks.
Yeah, we're moving right along now. We had three. You tell the story, Duke. The one that the state recommended never got back to us.
Right, we had three firms that work with the state and are very reputable. Rusty and I are interviewing two of them tomorrow because one did not submit a bid. Both costs are exactly the same. They feel they can, once we pick the architect, they've been part of the process all along, so they know where we are in the process. And once we pick an architect, they feel they can get us all the documents and put the submission package by June 30th.
So best case, we're looking at a reimbursement of somewhere in the ballpark of $5 million, right? And you think like 250 covers the cost of, hiring that person to manage the grant and everything else? Are there any other costs associated with the project, doing it by their rules on their schedule that we would have to think about? Like, are they making us build things we don't want to build, like a 12-foot wide hallway instead of a 10-foot wide hallway or something that we would be able to get around, or are we still?
They would be ed specs, so we would need to.
No,
We're still subject to that,
They're
right?
they're ed specs and all the ed, and
He was impressed with our ed specs.
yeah, they thought they were very thorough.
But the architects have come back and said, look, one of the things I would look at is potentially building a full-size gym.
Right.
And I would cut back on the bathroom space, different things like that. So they each submitted their own opinions. Each of the architectural firms have people on staff. A couple of them have architects that are part of the commission's board up in Hartford. So they're all very familiar with the grant process, and they know we will look for a consultant to help us through the process that will work with the architect.
But to Taylor's question, I think the Department of Education has specifications, and those are what the grant is based on. So you wouldn't see the inverse, like you're saying. If they say 12 and we do 10, we won't get reimbursed on that. If they say 10 and we do 12, we could still be reimbursed on the fact that we have met the criteria, but it's that delta that we would not see reimbursement on.
And so, I know that there are new square footage requirements for classrooms, right? Like really large
900.
classrooms. And we'd have to build a much larger school to comply with those requirements. And I don't know if we're already married to that or we want to do that. Do we have the option not to do that? Would we consider that? How does that
No,
change?
but I don't know that I'm going to answer for you. We're going to meet the state requirements at a minimum because otherwise there's no money. I mean, to put it quite bluntly. So we will meet state requirements. That's part of the ed specs that was delivered. And then from there, if there's other things that they believe, building committee feels is appropriate based upon conversations with architects, that may be something that they add on where we may or may not get reimbursed for. But as it comes to ed specs, we would be foolish if they say to build a 900 square foot classroom, to build an 899 square foot one makes no sense because it takes it out of any money back and we don't get enough back from the state as it is. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is we're going to meet the ed specs, and the question is, what are the extras we're going to do?
Right.
And the Board of Education has, that's the input from the Board of Education, the principals of the school, the teachers, and all of that. That's part of the process when you develop your design development, which is the third or fourth step in the process.
I also want to say, from what the process that you described, I do hear that it's a little bit more of a swag than a wag. So,
Swag, definitely.
but you're going to have some basic construction costs and other things like that. It may not be, so it's not just something that you're pulling out. You'll have some basis to be working
I
from.
mean, you have square footages.
Right.
We have a new site, updated site plan, so we have information on that. We're doing test borings, so we'll have information on that. There'll be a lot of information that we'll have that the architect who's chosen will have at their disposal to understand what's going on. And it is more scientific.
And I'm just curious because I understand what David and Martha were asking, that if we know the state is going to give us, as an example, 30,000, why would we go for more? I think that in order to have the process move along and the fact that you need state approval prior to going out to bid, it's better to have something higher that allows us to move and then come back down once the number is, than to go to 40 and then you have to come back for 20, which could slow the process down, especially since November the RTM doesn't meet and December we're at the state of the town, so there's not really a lot of stuff going on there. So, we lose 2 months on that, so we'll be in January. So from my perspective, in order for the building committee to move forward, it would be better to come with the higher number in June, and then when you're done,
Put it back.
come back.
Remember that when you, in this process of the architectural drawings, where you start with conceptual design, blah, 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 and you go all the way to construction drawings. When you go to the construction drawings finally, you get rid of one big contingency bucket, which is called the design contingency. That's done with, because you're no longer designing, you got this. Now you're left with your building contingency and your town contingency, which is for all the other things. At the garage, I think we had about, I can't remember, something like 7 or 8% between the two of them.
Yeah,
Because we were so certain of the cost, it was not a 10%.
Because we have construction, we have bids, right, all your design contingencies are gone. So you're, obviously, you have more of a swag back here, and that's, we're going to the RTM at the earliest stage, which is really, more swag.
the other thing that I do have a question, just so that, because we're going to talk about it other times. Typically, when the RTM approves an appropriation or an appropriation on bonding, 10 days afterwards, those funds are available. That's
Right.
okay. Look to Jen for a little nod saying that was right. This might be a little bit different because when we're voting on the contingency of the Board of Finance approving as well, because their meeting will be after the RTMs, or did they already approve this?
They have not approved it yet. It's written such that you can go first, and then it's Board of Finance the following day.
Okay, so we're not doing a contingent upon, we're just voting on it ourselves.
Right, you vote on it, and it's basically assuming Board of Finance also approves it, then it becomes
Effective on that date.
approved and becomes effective 10 days after that approval.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to clarify that because anybody who follows the Board of Finance knows they haven't done it. On some of the other ones that we're going to be dealing with, the Board of Finance has already approved those as part of their budget deliberations. So, first of all, I want to thank you because it's really a great explanation. And I am sure on our RTM meeting, I would love for you to be there to reiterate this explanation again, because I'm not capable of doing what you just did. And so I think it would be very helpful. But are we ready to vote?
Yeah.
All right, so we don't have any of the numbers for this yet. They're working on them up in the rules. So do I have a motion to move 19-something
Motion.
for the appropriating $3 million for the planning, design, and construction of the new elementary school in the town of Darien, and authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes in the amount of $3 million to meet said appropriation?
So moved.
Bert, second.
Second.
Second is from Stacy. All in favor? Seeing that this is unanimous, thank you. There was one other thing I wanted to mention on this, and it eluded me, and I'll think about it later, so it'll probably come back. But Kip, thank you very, very much for that.
Everybody here.
Why don't we get back to the budget, being that we moved that forward? I appreciate the committee allowing me to go up to rules. I want to start with the budget, with something that I've been having a conversation with both Kate and Jen around, and this is a very different budget year from prior years. We had a reval. We have changes in fund balance policy that was approved by the Board of Finance in the fall. The prior year, we stopped the drawdown of the fund balance and changed how we're calculating the collection rate, and while it isn't quote-unquote policy, it is the current methodology that we're using. We also had some contribution from the reserve group that Tammy, David, Mike, and Bert worked with Jen, that will be dealt with in the June meeting. The Board of Selectmen budget was more similar to the Board of Ed budget, where it became Kate's budget, the town administrator's budget, then it became the Board of Selectmen's budget, and then the Board of Selectmen gave it to the Board of Finance, so it's the Board of Finance. And it had some bumps, but we really think that, from my interaction, that it worked very well overall. And while there were some bumps with the buddy system on the Board of Finance, we'll figure that out next year. But all that doing, one of the things that we're is focusing on, and it's an analysis that Kate, Jen, and I were looking at, and almost how we're going to start, is that year after year we talk about a mill rate. And the mill rate is a calculated number. The real number is, what are we looking to raise through taxes? And if we go through what the two boards submitted, and then debt and other things, it really shows a different story from the mill rate. We came down that total general fund, and I'll pass this out, there was one change to the slides I handed out, and I went over it with Jen earlier. Total general fund really only went up 1.85% from adopted last year's budget to this year's budget. When you take away revenue, because remember the Board of Selectmen amount isn't net, and the Board of Ed number is net of certain reimbursements, and the Board of Selectmen isn't. When we take away the revenue that went up based upon some changes, the total to be raised through taxes only went up by 1.17%, which is pretty amazing with all the other stuff that's going on. It speaks very highly of all three boards, what they did in their cost, what they looked at in their revenue, and how the Board of Finance has been planning for our debt and other things that are moving on. We then reconciled back to what we bonded last year, we're bonding this year, as well as the special appropriation, which is consistent with Board of Ed fund balance policy that happened in the fall. And the total approved budget based upon the requests from the board, the debt, and the transfers really only went up 1.25%. And that's what we want people to focus on, because the mill rate actually went up more, but that's partially because our grand list went down. And so I think that is a more important number to evaluate what's going on. It's something actually Jim Kale and I always talked about, is taking on a look at what we saw and then how it ended up. And so we're going to really start with this when we're talking to the RTM, so they understand that this is really what we're evaluating. This is what we look at, and then the Board of Finance determines how to pay for things. So it's a different way to look at it, but I think it shows a really good job by our boards this year, and I think it's how I'd like to continue to move this. And I think that I don't want to put Jen on the spot, but I think that in our conversation, I think you and Kate are somewhat supportive of that being a little bit more of the focus on where we are.
Yes, absolutely.
So, with that, let's get to budget time, guys. Okay, I need somebody to move budget item A, an appropriation in the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures of $3.711. Do I have somebody moving it? That's item A.
Motion.
Motion, Stacy. Second. Second, James. Is there any discussion or questions on the capital items as they currently exist by any of the members of the committee? Going once? Going twice? Is the committee ready to vote? If we are ready to vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No? That moves forward. Item B, an appropriation in the general fund to the Selectmen's operating budget of $47,740,688. Do I have a motion to move?
Yes.
Bert, second. Taylor, thank you. Any discussion on the operating budget? I do want to mention two things. First of all, Dave and I had a follow-up conversation on the Park and Rec employee with Kate. I'm going to try and say this as appropriately as possible. There was a move the prior year of somebody from Park and Rec over to Public Works, and they held the Park and Rec position open. It turns out that the individual does a nice job in Park and Rec currently, but they still needed the support at the Park and Rec position. There's certain work that Kate is moving forward during the next year that we look forward to reviewing. And so I think that, Dave, based upon our conversation with Kate, you're okay with that position as it currently is explained?
I welcome Kate's attempts to get a more detailed accounting of how much time is actually spent by the crews in the different parks. My whole focus there was, do we know how much time the crews are spending in each of the parks, and is the additional body needed? Not because, the hourly wage and salary is the issue, but as John has mentioned several times, once you add on pension and benefits, longer term it becomes very expensive. So I think the hurdle for reaching incremental headcount is higher now.
In addition, I think that this committee has discussed the addition of the civilian dispatch in the past. Is there any other comments on that? If not, we're going to pass real quickly. Hearing none, are there any other questions on the Board of Selectmen operating budget? No? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of item B of 19-something, raise your hand. Thank you. Thank you. Any opposed? No, we're there. By the way, I do want to mention that for the second year in a row, I have to start watching where I put this meeting. We have two members who have been very active in the budget, whose daughters are in chorus today, and this is their last time that they're going to see their daughters sing, and as such, they are properly where they should be as opposed to here. We also had somebody who had a family emergency, and someone else is on business as well. So that explains why we're a little short today. But I will be checking with chorus in the future. Item C, an appropriation in the general fund to the education operating budget of $100,118,409. Do I have a motion?
Motion. Second.
I'll do Mike and Stacy. Any conversation or discussion? Are we ready to vote? If we're ready to vote, all those in favor, raise your hand. Seeing it's unanimous, time to move on. We have to do D simply because we're not sure everyone can add. So assuming that somebody is checking the adding, I'm assuming that Kate and Jen have done this so many multiple times that they can see it in their sleep.
So have members of the committee.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure. Knowing this committee, it did not miss a beat. Can I have a motion to move item D?
Motion.
Stacy, second. Bill, all those, I'm assuming there's no discussion on addition. All those in favor? None opposed, passed unanimous. This is where sometimes it helps reading things. On item E, I move to waive the reading of all these numbers because I don't read them as fast as John does in his committee, board. So if there's no objection, we see what the numbers are down here.
This one is E, Jack?
E, which is the appropriations for other funds are hereby made below. And it's the sewer fund, the sewer assessment, sewer capital, parking lot administration fund, and parking lot capital fund. We are a little bit at, Terry Duffy was our expert on this, and we are missing him this year because I believe Kip may have written Parking for Dummies, and I still refer to it to understand what goes on in that fund. But do I have a motion to move? Mike, Taylor, any discussion? Good, because Terry isn't here. All in favor? No opposed, that passes. That brings us down to the calculation for the mill rate, and we're gonna have slides on this. This is where the revenue comes in, and I'm just curious, we are going to show in some of our slides the adjustment to the adopted budget, because $495,000 of expense on the Board of Selectmen side without showing the corresponding revenue and grossing it up gives it an unfavorable number. That isn't fair when one is comparing year to year. I do applaud Kate and Jen for changing the accounting for the Park and Rec revenue and expenses, taking it off of the balance sheet and putting it in the revenue and expense side of that. So the four main things that I see that have affected the increase in our revenue is the $495,000 from the counting from the Park and Rec. After taking some very appropriate and prudent conservative years, we are this year recording some educational cost sharing for about $400,000. The prior year is not recording, and we're both wise and prudent and agreed to by this committee on that. We have $125,000 on investment income increase from 175 to 300, and there's about 30,000 on P&Z revenue, which, if you recall, we all approved in February and moved it up, and that comes to about, it counts roughly to the $1 million. There is, and I would be wrong for not mentioning, and we may have a slight disagreement with certain members of the Board of Finance, but in conversations I've had, there is some perhaps softness in the town clerk's revenue, simply because, this isn't a corporation where you can go and say, go and advertise and bring in more revenue. It's to walk in the door. And when something that needs to be recognized is that when the schools and Kate start this budget, we're really talking about back in September and other things, and there's certain assumptions that have to be made that change. So, we're all hopeful that the shovel goes into the ground on these projects sooner rather than later. But, so there is maybe some softness on the building side. It doesn't mean that we're not getting the revenue. It just means that if we don't get it this year, we'll get it, in the next budget year, we'll get it in the next budget cycle. So I want to mention that. And still that's outstanding, which is going to come with the tax side, is, the state is still playing with car taxes. And we don't know what the answer on that is. We're hopeful that they have some sanity, but we don't know that that's necessarily the case, but it is included in this budget as it should be properly. So with that, that moves us to a tax of 16.47 mils on a grand list of $8.4 billion, 8.5 actually. And so I want to take a little bit of a step back here, and I don't mean to put Jen on the spot, but I give her a little bit of advance warning. Can you reiterate the policy that, not the policy, the practice that was put into place last year on calculating the taxes, the 5-year average, and why the 25 basis points?
Right, what we used to do is budget a contribution from fund balance, it was around $1.1 million, and we had a very low assumed collection rate, rate 98.9%. We collect well over 99%. So what the Board of Finance decided to do was to eliminate the budgeted contribution from fund balance and bring the assumed collection rate closer to reality for calculating the mill rate. So what we've settled on, we used it for the current year's budget, it seems to be working well, and we're using the same approach for 1920, and we'll evaluate when we have a couple of years, see if it really does work well. Taking the 5-year average of collections and reducing it by 25 basis points to give us a little bit of a cushion if there's any reduction in the grand list because of allowed changes throughout the year, or if we start to see an erosion in collections, we have a little bit of a cushion.
Interesting enough, which we've had this conversation, Jen pointed out, is that our collection rate in July is higher than our collection rate in January. And, you know, I don't know why, but if I recall, that happened. Even though the payments are relatively the same. I mean, it does have some effect last year because people were paying things in December, and then AMT came into it to sort of eliminate all of it. But the fact is that I did want to reiterate what the policy is. The 25 basis points seems reasonable, and I believe, and pardon me for misstating, this isn't policy, it's just the current practice.
Right.
So we'll see how this works, and the Board of Finance will then work with it. So do I have somebody moving 19-something F? James, second. Taylor, all those in favor? Seeing none, opposed, all unanimous, let's move on. Item G is a cash management item that we do every year. I am not aware of us ever using it, and I've been around for some time. Are you aware that if we've ever used it? But it just provides a $5 million line of credit should something occur. Although I will also mention one of the things, if you follow the Board of Finance, that the Board of Finance has been doing is changing our payment dates so everything isn't coming due in the summer months and moving some of it to the March, April. So that becomes important. Do I have somebody moving items?
One question,
Sure.
Jen, do we have a committed facility that we pay money for, or is it just a general borrowing authorization?
We use US Bank as our.
Okay, so
our
there's a
parent.
committed,
We fund into Webster's debt service payment service every 6 months. We fund in what we're gonna pay for the next 6 months, and then they transfer over to US Bank when it is due.
so is this, if you have 5 million short, is that facility that you would draw against, or?
No, we would have to issue tax anticipation.
Okay, thank you.
So we're not paying anything for it, it's just the
No,
authorization.
it's there if we had a cash
to do
flow.
it. Okay.
issue.
Just for education purposes, what sort of are the durations of the anticipation notes?
I don't know because hardly anybody issues them. I think Bridgeport may issue them. Other than that, It's really if for some reason you couldn't come to an agreement on your budget, we couldn't send out tax bills and we had to still pay our regular bills and operate. We have sufficient cash with our fund balance to cover that. Barring any extraordinary circumstances, we wouldn't be issuing them, so honestly, I don't even know much about them.
Okay, I'm assuming for us, they would have some option for incredibly short duration as well. right?
Yes.
Did we have somebody move this in second? Good, okay. It gets tough when you're getting old. All in favor? Seeing, being unanimous, we're going to move on. The next is the resolution appropriating $30 million to refund certain of the town's outstanding bonds and authorizing the issuance of refunding bonds to finance such appropriation. I have been instructed that I'm not allowed to say why we do this anymore. And since I respect Kate, I will not do it. It's just a common practice that we have that gives the availability to the Board of Finance should an opportunity exist that they can move forward. Do I have somebody moving this motion?
Yeah, just a question, oh, yeah.
Sure, go ahead, ask the question.
No, just a question, I mean, is there something driving this other than
No,
having the ability to do it? Are we looking to do something?
it's just the ability to do it.
Okay.
I'm not allowed to give the explanation of what drove it at one time, so it's just the ability to do
Fair
it.
enough.
Well, now I wanna know.
I'll tell you offline.
I got Steve rewatch it. I go, what is this?
Stacy, I can tell you.
Does it say that I have certain fear of Kate? Yes.
Place together
But-
videos from the last.
Which I'm just having a little fun because Kate's on vacation.
At the booth after the meeting.
Okay.
The highlight.
So can I have somebody move this so we can move on? James Taylor, second. All in favor? Next. Okay, I want to go in to the fact that on these items that are being bonded, again, 10 days, because this has already been approved by the Board of Finance during their budget deliberations, and the fact that we don't want to have discussions as we had last June, even though we mentioned we were bonding certain things and people raised them again. Both Kate and Jen have been really great in moving this forward, so it's during the budget process, and we appreciate that. I first want to deal with the resolution appropriating $609,000 for the Highland Farm Improvement Project and the authorizing an issuance of bonds and notes in the amount of $609,000 to meet said appropriation. Again, once we do this 10 days after the RTM meeting, Kate can start to work with Public Works and the like to move that forward. Also, I do want to say that all of you have received a 2-page document. Took me a while to realize it was 2 pages. For the estimate for the Highland Farms. The reason why it is 2 different estimates, if you recall, is that initially the Board of Selectmen were going to do some this year in the fiscal year 20 and some in fiscal year 21, and hence the 2 estimates were to have the appropriate detail for both of those areas. During the Board of Selectmen budget deliberations, the decision was to move that forward. In conversations with Kate, because it's all being done in 1 year, as well as the fact that the Public Works can do some of this work, while the estimate is higher than what their request is, Kate feels very strongly that the request is the appropriate amount. And I have to now, let me go, because I want to make sure I have this appropriately. This does include parking lot, a walking trail, and a equipment shed. And those are the 3 items, contrary to the letter to the editor, that said that they did not exist. In addition, I personally, having looked at the detail where we're down to half cubic yards of various things in the initial estimate, feel that there is sufficient detail that has been presented to both the Board of Selectmen and discussed at their meeting, as well as presented to F&B, and I passed this on to the RTM, Park and Rec Committee, that although it is not a town park, that they will also be reviewing the same detail that we have.
Does it include the storage shed? Does it include a bathroom?
At this time, I don't believe it does.
That to me seems like an oversight.
I honestly cannot comment on that. I asked if it included a comfort station, and my understanding was it did not. I didn't follow up because, on that at this time, but I will follow up with Kate on that, even though we're moving on it. But I did want to respond. I thought it was appropriate that this committee, since we have looked at various things, is putting on the record what information is available, what is being done, what the Board of Selectmen discussed being done, so that it's on the record on the detail that does exist, which I think was reasonably good detail.
I mean, I support it, but I
Yeah, no,
feel
I-
that would
I
wanna
asked
underfund it.
the same
Is
question.
there still a plan to use it for playing fields, and is there more investment that needs to be made to do that?
That is not part of our approval process at this time, and that can be discussed at a later date, but I can't answer that either. It's allowed.
Jack, is the parking that they're doing there, is that the 90-ish odd spots that were kind of previously talked about?
I'll look over for some assistance. I do believe that it includes an appropriate number of parking spots, and that's about the best I can say. There, I do believe it has 2 parking areas, that it includes traffic flow studies. And so, you know, these are the estimates of what, and remember, if you look at the date, Kate got this initial estimate in September. So there's gonna be some additional discussions before it goes out, and I think that we need to give it the appropriation, and then we can have input and ask questions,
Okay.
but give her the authorization so she can move forward.
Okay.
Jack, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on this project if you want me to comment.
Please do.
92 parking spaces, yes. The fields will be used as they exist for whatever park programming is scheduled to happen. There won't be other improvements other than if there's any irregularities in the turf that might be unsafe, then there could be a little bit of dirt put up to level out, but for no other purpose than for safety. It does not include a fully constructed comfort station because there were questions when that was proposed about the exact location. It's intended to be adjacent to the western parking lot, but there was some question as to whether it should be at the end of the parking lot or closer to the entrance. So we figured that we would live with the storage shed for now, with a porta-john seasonally, only as needed, until we see how the property's being utilized.
So Jamie, when you say make improvements for safety purposes,
Yes.
there was the section of that field that had been used as a riding rink by the
Yes.
club where the level is probably 2.5 to 3 feet below grade. Are we talking about leveling that whole section?
They might try and smooth that down a little bit, but if they don't do that, then they'll just manage the programming accordingly so that no programs happen over the.
You gotta remember, we also are allowing the home club to use that property for that show for approximately 1 week a year. And so I hate to think that we're filling something in to have to dig it out so that the show can go on.
No, that's
So,
not the case. They're
it's not
not
the-
using it as a riding ring,
Okay.
so that would be.
No, they already covered it and seeded it, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Haven't been there for quite some time.
Is the parking lot semi-permeable pavers or is it asphalt?
It's intended to be permeable asphalt.
Oh, okay, so it'll look like an asphalt parking lot, but it,
Yes.
whatever its material is, it'll allow for drainage. Okay.
Yeah, we discussed, I had a
I
similar
didn't know such a
question
thing
on
existed.
Short, is it Short Hills? Short Lane rather, that whether or not we would be doing the permeable asphalt on that future project. So, but are there any other items of discussion? As such, can I have somebody move it? Stacy, second Taylor, all those in favor? Great. Next is resolution appropriating $558,250 for the Henley Elementary School roof replacement project and authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes in the amount of $558,250 to meet said appropriation. Do I have somebody move it? Bert? David for second?
Sure.
Is there any discussion on this?
Jack, do we have, I need to see this, are there bids already on the project?
We cannot bid until it's, the appropriation is approved.
Can't request, so there's no RFP?
We don't have a formal, obviously, there's been conversations of what it would cost by Mr. Lynch, and that was presented during the Board of Ed meetings.
Okay.
But the formal bidding process cannot occur until the appropriation is approved by the RTM and then add 10 days. So it can be done. I mean, in certain ways, I look at these as well as the special appropriation we're doing is very similar to what we have done in the past when we have gone off cycle to do an appropriation, be it for a school boiler or other projects that we've done in the past. I do have a quick question.
Sure.
First of all, I want to congratulate Jamie on the 3 buildings that just had the solar panels put on and worthy to know. And I happen to read, but I don't recall, that the Board of Ed is looking to do the same on certain of their school buildings. I know one of the things that it's dependent is having a new roof. So, is this one of the buildings that we will be considering?
Yes, and that was one of the reasons we wanted to get it done, because as you put the panels on the roof, once it needed to get done, you put the panels on the roof, you're not gonna patch and repair the roof, you're looking for the longest duration of the time you can. We have some panels on some roofs currently, and we have, but 35 Leroy, Henley, everyone keep me honest, is it Holmes?
I thought Tokenie.
Holmes and Tokenie. Oxford actually has the most right now, but they're the oldest, and they're kind of time to go as well.
Well, I think that the Board of Selectmen and the committee that's been, the sustainability, if I have it right, their name, has been really good on a lot of this stuff, and the town should be very proud of moving in this direction and appreciate that the Board of Ed is doing the same. If nothing else, besides the fact that it saves money, it's the carbon footprint that is also worthy to note. So I want to congratulate both of the board chairs on that.
Thank you.
Do we know the age of the Henley roof? It seems to me, I remember when I was on the Board of Finance, the roof was replaced. And now I was on for 9 years and I've been off for
Top of my head,
probably
everyone
about
just
5. But that's probably only 14 years. I'm just,
It has, we talked about it at the Board of Ed meeting, it has a strong enough duration for the duration of the panels, as I remember, that's why it was looked at as one of the likely. The reason Oxford has the panels, or at the time, it had the best roof to put it on. I don't off the top of my head.
No, but maybe that, I'm just wondering why a roof is being replaced, that's maybe not, you know, I don't know, most
Yeah,
roofs, I would
it's a
assume last
section of the
30
roof
years.
that had not been replaced.
A section.
Yeah,
had
this
not.
is a
Okay,
section of the roof.
that's quite possible.
Are we ready to vote? All in favor? That one passes. So, we're now down to the special appropriation, and I'm gonna ask Jen to, again, give an update. This is something that Jen and the Board of Finance have been discussing for some time. So it's not something that just popped up, but there's been multiple meetings where this has been discussed. Can you provide us with an explanation of the fund balance policy, what we're now looking at fund balance compared to versus the past, and, you know, based upon, as I've been told, the efficiencies of the budget, how this comes about?
Yeah, so the Board of Finance has, for several years, had a fund balance policy. They reviewed it in the fall, which they do periodically, and at that time, they decided to make it a little bit more usable for budgeting purposes, and they changed the policy, the target minimum fund balance to be 12%, unassigned fund balance to be 12% of budgeted revenues. So it's very easy for us to project and calculate and see where we are against that benchmark. Fiscal 18, we added a considerable amount to fund balance, primarily from some one-time items. Board of Education turned back about $700,000 because of additional excess cost money that they got. We had a couple other one-time items related to the capital cleanup on the town side. So fund balance, unassigned fund balance increased significantly from fiscal 18 to fiscal 19. At the start of fiscal 19, unassigned fund balance was 15.45% of budgeted revenues. And then rolling forward to the fiscal 20 budget, assuming we don't have much variation in the current year, we're not expecting anything significant, we'd be at 15.19% of budgeted revenues. So that's about $4.7 million in excess of the 12%. Going back to the discussion about the mill rate and the assumed collection rate, because we're not budgeting a fund balance contribution, the Board of Finance looked at this separately and said, what are the potential draws on fund balance that we might see in the next year? You know, what are the risks in the budget? And they identified the teacher's retirement payment, probably not likely, but the concept is still floating around. As Jack's mentioned, the timing of the building projects and when they'll pull those permits. State grants such as educational cost sharing, town aid road, it came out to about $2 million. They're not likely to all happen, but one or more of those could happen. So the Board of Finance felt comfortable appropriating $500,000 of fund balance. And what they did was identify 4 capital projects, remove them from the budget so we're not taxing for them, and we'll fund them through a special appropriation of fund balance.
So is it safe to say that every year, if the actual numbers are lower in terms of cost or higher in terms of revenue, that goes automatically into the fund balance?
Yes, when we close out the general fund, any surplus goes into.
And do we ever look at the previous year and say, like in this year, we say, we're gonna spend $500,000 of that money because 500,000 came back last year?
This is the first year that we've taken this approach with looking at fund balance
Okay.
kind of separately. I don't envision a direct, we added $500,000, let's appropriate $500,000, because the discussion really did center around what are the potential draws from fund balance, and even longer term than this 1 year. What if we do have a significant payment for teachers' retirement that ramps up over time? Do we want to reserve some fund balance and draw that down and smooth that impact rather than draw it all down in 1 year and then we have an increase the following year? So I don't think it's necessarily result of 1 year equals contribution the next year, but that certainly factors in because as the fund balance grows, there could be money to.
Yeah, because this year there was some discussions about the investment income. That money, even if it's budgeted less than it's actually received, is not lost. It goes into
Correct.
the general balance, and so it's available again.
Yes.
And so it was wise, I believe, to budget conservatively, because in the end, that money is available again in the next year.
The one thing I might add, because I'll say two things. First, even if we're quote-unquote reserving for the potential of a teacher's pension coming, we're not assigning that, so it's saying unassigned.
Correct.
So that's number one, just because we're only looking at unassigned balances. Obviously, some of the joint work that we did with yourself and the Board of Finance are going to be adding some additional things back in
Right.
June, which I know you've taken into account. But the other thing is, based upon the modification to the fund balance policy, as part of the budget how to pay, I would assume that in future years, the Board of Finance will be reviewing this and then determining based upon the circumstances of what exists in that year, whether or not additional contributions might or might not be made. So this analysis will be going forward every year,
Right.
even though the specific contribution may or may not happen, or may not be related to what both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed return based upon efficiencies in their budget.
Correct.
Okay.
I just had a question, is this, whether or not we decide to make the reserve, this fund balance, is that something is going to continually, it's cumulative? In other words, we're going to be, do we have a cap where we're going to, or is it just something that we decide on every year?
The board policy doesn't have a cap on fund balance. They have a minimum of 12% of budgeted revenues, and then beyond that, it's really their discussion of, do they think that it's grown to a point where some should be appropriated back in the manner that we did, or, you know, is there something large coming down the road that really does warrant having a higher balance in there? So there is no cap on it. It'll be an ongoing discussion.
If I might, and correct me if I'm wrong, but over the last several years, because we had a higher fund balance, we were drawing it down. And so, you know, the last couple of years, we've been adding back to, which is always helpful to the credit agencies. I mean, we were purposely drawing it down because it was high, but, you know, and then it's gone up a little bit. So I think that from listening to the discussions that were taking place at the Board of Finance, this is a improvement on where we were before.
Right, and it's also something that the board is keeping their eye on, because in a perfect world, our budget would come in with no contribution to fund balance, because revenues would meet budget, expenditures would meet budget, would be zero. And so then as the budget grows, if the fund balance stays the same, fund balance as a percentage of revenues goes down, and so we do need to see, when we project out, are we gonna drop below that 12%, and how do we address that?
Because we could always end up having to incur taxing our citizens if it drops below that amount to ensure that our fund balance is at the appropriate level, not someplace we want to be. So you hope for an appropriate, prudent, and conservative approach on the projections of the Board of Finance on how we're paying for certain things. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say is that the reason we embarked on that effort was that the fund balance, if you looked at the way we calculated it before, that was a percentage of, and Jennifer, you've got the words for this was a state-defined revenue that actually included the teacher pension contributions. So you look at these percentages, you just can't get your mind around it. Plus, we were not looking at fund balance carefully. It was just a perfunctory draw that was part of the budget process. So what we did was strip all that out, rationalize the percentage that was used to determine an appropriate fund balance, and then set ourselves up to look at it very carefully, because as you know, fund balance is an important contributing factor in the rating agency determination of what our town's credit rating is. And so we wanted to have something that was a lot more precise, diligent and regular in terms of how we look at fund balance. Jennifer's right, if the fund balance does go below our targeted 12% level, we conceivably would have to raise taxes in a given year to make up for that, to keep fund balance where it needs to be. Nothing I've seen suggests that that might even be considered for another 5 years out. So our fund balance, even with the draw that's proposed, so our fund balance is actually in very good shape, and we think this policy will enable us to keep it there.
I just want to say I love that this happened this year, that we were able to make a contribution to keeping, the mill rate increase under control with the declining grand list and with the challenges that you guys faced with healthcare costs and everything that kind of was, we were all staring in the face when we got those budget books several months ago. Really, I'm so impressed with how this budget turned out, given everything that was happening. And then looking forward and seeing what's coming from Hartford, potentially, the volatility that we could see. It's great that we're watching this and managing it and forecasting and trying to prepare. One of the analyses that we've done here on the Board of Ed side over the last couple of years is to look and see what we've spent versus what was budgeted year over year, and how some money is needed to be spent in excess of what was budgeted, and some was ended up at the end of the year that it was spent on other things that maybe weren't planned for. And I think this just gives us a really tangible way to use any excess funds that are found throughout the year in a great way to help reduce volatility going forward. I think I'd like to see us really be careful to try and return as much as we can to the town at the end of the year, to try and keep this building and potentially helping future mill rate increases to be minimized.
Well, so to be clear, and I think what you're talking about is some of the flexibility, because we budget 18 months out and needs change and children change. We don't go over budget anywhere. We can't go over our appropriation. And we can't hold surpluses year over year. So yes, you definitely do see that the plan, as we develop this in September and what comes to us in December, sometimes changes by the following June. And often that's either by a new need or children who have certain educational needs that you can't predict. But we can't go over budget. There might be line item shifts, which is specifically why state statute requires boards of education to have an itemized estimate and not a budget. And the language is very specific. So for everyone watching, I don't want anyone to think that we go over budget. Because if we did, we would be back in front of the Board of Finance,
it's not the
and they
whole
might be
budget,
wagging their
but
fingers at us.
I will joke on both of that you can watch the quarterly budget review to see all the transfers. Both the Board of Finance and I guess the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed all do their transfers at the end of their meeting, when you're all tired and just say, okay, just get those transfers done.
We spend a little more time on both sides.
But the fact of the matter is any of the transfers that happen in any of those budgets are discussed in detail with explanations and provided to those boards, so that they're not, and it is because there needs to be some flexibility in those line items, because things change and new events come up and other things happen. And the reality is setting a quote-unquote budget 18 months in advance and then thinking you're running a business, which both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed do, and holding it to exactly those numbers without some modification is just unrealistic.
And I certainly agree.
Just one other note to add, we made a real effort this year in the Board of Selectmen's budget to look at all those transfers that we did last year, so that we can make sure that we're not year over year, not budgeting properly in certain line items. It's really important to go back and look at those transfers when you're crafting your next cycle budget.
Yeah, I think, and Kate did that, and Kate and I have joked, if you go back to one of the Raiders movies where they're doing the Holy Grail, some people, where the person says that some people choose poorly, some people budget better than others. and Kate's been working on making sure that those things are modified, and it reflected in this year's budget when we went through some of her changes. Anyway, getting back to our 4 items that we have new sidewalk installation for $200,000. We have the Norotan Ledge intersection design, which I've asked the Public Works Committee to provide more information, and Ed has presented that to the RTM at his meeting, I think in February, which was really good, covering several of those. We have short lane construction for $50,000 and the homes RTU replacement for $75,000, which equals $500,000. I take it we moved and seconded this? Okay, so we need to move and second. Brad, you're moving it, thank you.
I will move it.
And Stacy seconding, all in favor? Thank you. I also want to mention that if you recall following the budget, there was also a discussion of a modification to the previously determined, previously approved town generator for $50,000 to that bonding issue. That is being re-looked at, and if it is going to be moving forward, we will see it in June.
Right, Ed is working on the numbers. If he has a number by the end of May, we'll get a resolution, working through the process. If he's unable to get a resolution or a number by May, we'll have to reevaluate how we approach it.
The last thing is, and I put Jen a little bit on the spot, but I've had quite a number of requests when we're talking about the bonding, and actually, as you saw when we proved back out to what the requests are, that the changes in bonding and appropriation really only changed 7 basis points of what the actual increase was. But I've been requested by several members of the RTM to have a little bit of a conversation when we are bonding. What is the future effect on future budgets? And so, not being my forte as bonding, and after a brief conversation, I decided to go to the source, which is Jen, and Jen is currently looking to come up with a methodology that we can discuss this, and it would cover the $3 million and the other 2 that we presented, so that will now start to be part of our presentation to the RTM when we're discussing bonding. We also, and I'll spend some time with Jen, I do have some quick questions just because I wasn't sure that I was reading this right.
Mm-hmm.
If I go to the debt service part of the budget, 218, so currently, at the end of fiscal year 20, we will have approximately 47 million of outstanding debt. Our principal appears to be paying between $8 to $9 million a year. Does that amount include the 4.1 that we just bonded?
No, it does not.
Okay, so that's up a little bit, and this is partly so I can do the report, and I'm not bugging you totally on this, which I'm going to anyway. In addition, when I'm looking at the authorized but unissued, there's another 5 million that we have authorized but have not issued yet.
Well, we've issued 4.185 of that now.
Okay, that's what I
Yeah.
wanted to double check. So the only thing that's outstanding is approximately $1 million of authorized, but we haven't issued yet.
Right, and we don't expect it. We've
Okay.
fully issued for most everything on here. For the garage, we had unspent funds that we didn't even need to issue for, so we'll be going back through here and closing out the authorizations to reduce them for anything that's not needed to borrow.
Well, that saves us about 15 minutes on the phone. Thank you. For me to understand that. With that, the only thing that I've provided some of the slides. I'm not going to talk about it tonight, but Jen, Kate, and I have been, any input that you have, please get back to us as we're going to take it. We are going to have overhead slides because I think it helps. Jen has been great in putting them together for us. And there's one minor change that Jen and I went over tonight, which I think is good. We have the outstanding minutes of
April 11th.
April 11th?
April 8th.
Sorry. Can somebody move that, Stacy? Do I have a second? Bill? I have been advised by Bert, who actually went into Robert's Rules of Order, that even if you were not at that meeting, you can vote on approving the minutes based upon the fact that you're commenting on the veracity that somebody took the minutes. So, all those in favor of the minutes? Oh, go ahead.
I'm gonna abstain, I was not there, notwithstanding Mr. Roberts' rules.
We have, any other abstentions? We have one abstention, otherwise it goes from there. Do I have a motion to, before I do that? I want to thank all of you for the hard work that you have done, the many meetings that you attended, the many difficult questions that you asked, not only within the committee, but of the other boards. And I am just really honored to be part of this group. So now can I have a motion to adjourn? And by the way, after budget, we're going to someplace for drinks.
And we also want to thank our chairman
Yeah.
for guiding us and getting us through this. It's really more important than you think that we're in this from day one of the budget process. Some people think, oh, these F&B guys are around again. I think if you were to do it now, when the boards have decided on the budget and we just say yes or no and recommend it to the full RTM, we would not be credible. But now that we are or have been part of the process, we are credible, and we thank our chairman to do that.
Well, I think you really have to
Well
thank
said, Bert.
the first selectman and the chairman of the other boards who are open for a conversation even when they think we're just pains. But that, having that open conversation is really helpful to us, and we really appreciate their openness and willingness to have honest conversations, even if we disagree. With that, I will now take a motion to get out of here.
I'll move it.
Brad, second? All in favor? Thank you.